So now we're finally done with permission issues, right? No, there's always more. Permissions is the gift that just keeps on giving. And in this case, it's not really a permissions issue. It's actually a CORS issue. So I'm going to show you how to correct that. I want you to know that I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. So I will link to this documentation, which tells you how to correct the Google Cloud Bucket CORS issue, which I ran into. And that's why I Googled it. That's how I found this documentation. And that's how these are like the instructions I'm going to follow to show you how to fix it. So we could do this without actually committing anything to source control, but I think it's always good to have that. So I'm going to create a utils directory, and in that, I'm going to add a file called gcs.cors.json. And this is the CORS policy I'm going to set. CORS is basically a way to block requests from a web browser if they don't come from like a specific origin. It won't actually block requests like if you use an HTTP client like Thunder Client or something. It's specifically for browsers. In our case, we're going to say any origin should be able to upload to our URL. Now, if we were smart, we'd probably set this to the domain that our website is actually deployed at, specifically our UI, or even like localhost or something, but I'm just going to set it to star. And the method we're going to be allowing is put, because that's what you use to upload videos, upload files to GCS. So that's as much as I'm going to discuss this. But to actually implement this, I'm going to open up the terminal, navigating to the root directory. I'm going to run this command, gcloud storage buckets update dash the name of the bucket, of course, which in our case is neatcode dash YouTube dash raw videos. Yours might be a bit different. Well, yours for certain is going to be different. And the CORS file that we're specifying is this one in the utils directory. So I'm going to run this command, and it was complete. So it's just that easy. And there's actually one last thing that you might need to do as well, which is navigate to this page. I'll actually disable it just to show you what it would look like if it's disabled. So when you get to this page, you're going to want to enable it. I'll link it below, so it'll be pretty easy for you, but it's just that easy. You're just going to click a button. I don't even know why I showed it to you. I'm sure you could have figured that out. But yeah, it's pretty quick. And it's necessary to generate the signed URL and upload a file. So now for the fun part, actually adding code to our UI to handle video uploads. Now the first step is of course going to be in our Firebase directory. We want to be able to invoke this upload video function. So what I'm actually going to do is create a separate file for that, and I'm going to call it functions.ts. This is where we're going to put all of our Firebase functions code into. And we're going to start with a couple imports, and that's going to be importing get functions and importing HTTPS callable. And that's going to be from the Firebase package, specifically the functions package in Firebase. For us to actually invoke functions, we have to get an instance of it like this. I'm going to call it functions actually. When you want to call a callable function, like I said, it's easier than specifying the endpoint URL. Like we do have an endpoint URL for every callable functions, but we can specify it a bit easier. We can use kind of this like wrapper around it, which is HTTPS callable. And all we have to do is pass in our functions instance that we declared up above and the name of the Firebase function, which in our case is upload URL. And remember, the reason it can even identify this guy is because we initialized our Firebase config here. So it knows exactly which project that we're referencing. So keep that in mind. Like this isn't magic. There are like steps behind everything. We're going to not invoke this like in a raw way. We're not just going to export this generate upload URL. We're actually going to create a wrapper around it, and it's going to be asynchronous, and it's going to be about uploading a video, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do here. And when we're uploading a video, it is a file, and this file type is just from like the Node.js or JavaScript file type. So when a user wants to upload a video, the first thing we should do is take that file, figure out the extension name, and then pass it to our generate upload URL call. Like I said, we can pass data into this. When you hover over it, you can see it's an optional field, but we can pass data. In our case, we definitely want to. We know it expects a field that looks like this, extension. Okay, I need to figure out how to spell, but how do we get the file extension? Well, the easiest way is to take the file, and it has a name attribute, and then we can split it based on the period and then pop the last field from that, because this returns an array and we want the last one, which is the file extension. I can probably get rid of that. So that's important. We need to pass that in or we won't be able to generate a unique file name. And we're actually going to call await on this because we definitely want to actually get the response before we continue with the rest of this function. So now that we have the response, what do? Well, getting the upload URL is not enough. We actually need to upload the file, assuming there weren't any exceptions or anything like that. This is the part where we upload the file via the signed URL. And it's pretty easy. We're going to use the fetch API, which the first parameter is going to be the endpoint URL, which will be contained in the response of the callable function. It'll actually be under the data attribute, and it will be, I think, the URL. Perhaps we need this operator. Yeah, so since it's possible that data could be undefined, this question mark in TypeScript basically says if response is undefined, then don't continue with the rest of this expression. And if it isn't undefined, then continue with the rest of this expression. And same thing with data. Data could be undefined. So here we'll also have that. And I think we're going to use the URL. It's not going to be statically typed here, but we know that our generate upload URL is returning that when you actually go to the declaration where we declared it here. Remember, it is returning a URL, also a file name, but we don't care about the file name. Now, the reason we're getting a type error is because we probably need to explicitly cast this to the any type. And basically that tells TypeScript that we don't know what type this could be. So don't give us a type error for accessing these types of attributes. And the next thing when calling an HTTP function, an HTTP endpoint, is to pass in the headers. Well, not just the headers, but actually all of the options. And what type of HTTP request is this? This is kind of the most important part. It is a put request. So you always want to put the method of the endpoint. And in our case, we are passing in some data, which you usually pass in the body of the request. And in our case, we're just passing in the file. This is what we're actually uploading, that object. And for headers, this is also important because how is it supposed to know what is the type of this? Like, is it JSON? Is it something else? We have to tell that in the headers. So we're telling it the content type of this is the file dot type. That's pretty important. Once we have that done, notice we are calling await on it. After that, we can return. We don't really need to return anything from this function, this upload function. So we won't do that, but maybe it would be good to do that. You could also add some additional error handling here, but I'm going to handle that outside of this function. So now we're good to go here. The next thing I'm going to do is create a component in our navbar. It's an upload component. I probably could take that outside of the navbar in case we want to upload videos from different pages and other places that are not from within the navbar. But in this case, we're not going to be doing that. So I'm going to put that right here. I'm going to create upload.tsx as well as the CSS file, which is going to be upload.module.css. And I'll just copy and paste the CSS and I'll briefly go over it, but this isn't like the most important part. We're going to have, as you can kind of tell, an upload input and an upload button. An input is just how you handle any type of input, whether it's text input or like a checkbox or even a file upload in HTML, but it doesn't look very good. So we're actually going to hide that element and you can replace it with other elements. And we're going to do that with an upload button. And we're going to make that upload button look a lot nicer. And these three lines are just to center the button and its contents. These are the dimensions, of course. We're going to make it a circular button. The text and the contents are going to be black. It's not going to have a border. When you hover the button, your mouse should turn into like this. Like when I'm hovering these buttons, my mouse is kind of turning into that like hand icon. We're going to add a bit of padding and the font size is going to be 10. I don't think we actually need this line because there's not going to be any text. The upload button, when you hover it, the background color is going to change. That's just some styling as well. It's not super important. Now heading into the actual upload component, we're going to start with some boilerplate, and the first line here is use client. So once again, this is going to be a client side component. Now I'm actually going to create the component. It's going to be, of course, a function. That's how React usually does things. I'm going to call it upload. It's not going to have any parameters, and it's going to return initially a fragment like this. And a fragment is just a way to wrap multiple elements without actually creating an element in the DOM. You could replace this with a div, but that's not efficient because then we're going to create an extra element that we don't really need. And if you try to, in React, return multiple elements, in my case, I'm going to return an input and a label. If I try to do that, see, like right now, if I try to return multiple elements, it doesn't let me. You have to wrap the elements in a single element. You can only return one element from any component. So that's what fragment is for. Of course, we're importing the upload video function and we're importing the styles. We'll add the styles because that's kind of the easy part. So for here, we're going to set this to styles dot, I forgot the name. So let's find it. we have an upload input and an upload button. This is of course the input. So this is going to be upload input, and the label down here is going to be the upload button. Even though it's technically a label, we're going to style it like a button. And to say that this is going to be tied to this input, because this input is what's going to be used to upload the video, we have to somehow associate this label and say that this is actually replacing this input. And we can do that by adding an ID to this and saying that this is the upload component, the upload element, and this is for that component. I think that's with HTML4. So like that. Now we actually have to specify that this is for uploading videos, and we can do that by here saying that the type for this is going to be file, and not only any type of file, but also this is going to accept videos, and we can do that by saying video/star. So we'll accept any type of video, whether it's an MP4 or MOV or whatever other types of formats exist. And I don't think we actually need a closing tag for this, so I'm going to get rid of it and then put a slash over here. Now we are going to need a closing tag for the label, and that's because we're going to add some icon in the middle of this, and I'll show you where I'm going to get the icon from. If you go to Hero Icons, which provides you free icons, we can look for a video icon here, and we get something here, and we can copy the SVG code, but you probably can tell we probably want the JSX code because that's what we're using. So we're going to copy that. And here, I'm just going to paste that, and we're pretty much going to use it as is. You don't have to understand what's going on here, so don't feel stressed about that. But I'm going to take the stroke width and set it to 1.2 just to make it a little bit less thick. And here, we're almost done. So if I show you what this code looks like now, well, actually, before I do that, I should probably render this element somewhere. Just because we put it in the navbar folder doesn't mean it's going to go in the navbar component. So let's here replace our handy dandy to do with the upload component, and we'll have a closing tag like that. So now when you go to your browser, when you have this running, you'll find an upload icon right in the middle of the screen. But even if we sign out, we still see it. We don't want signed out users to be able to use this button. So how do we fix that? Well, back in the code, for the sign in button, we passed in the user because the sign in button changes. It can be either sign in, sign out, depending on if the user is null or not. But we probably don't need to pass in the user to the upload button. We just need to not render it if the user is signed in. And we can do that pretty easily like this: user and button. Basically, if this evaluates to true, then it will execute the rest of this. But if this evaluates to false, aka null, it won't have any need to execute the rest of this because any expression like this is going to be false if the first one is false. That's the point of the logic and operator. That's just like a short way to write this instead of having like if statements or anything like that. So now back in the code, you can see the button is still there because we're signed in. When we sign out, it disappears. When we sign back in, the button comes back. Great. Now we just need to actually add some functionality to this. So how we can do that is by going to the input element and adding an onChange handler. So when the video changes, we want to execute this callback, and we have to actually define it, but I'm going to call it handle file change. And as you can guess, that's probably going to be dealing with actually uploading the file. So within the component code here, let's declare a function handle file change, which is going to take an event. That's usually what happens with like click callbacks. The exact type of this is going to be change event, and the type of it is going to be HTML input element, because that's what we click, not like a button or something like that. And the body is going to look like this, where we extract the file from the event. So we go like this, event.target.files, which might be null. So I think we can add the question mark there. It could be null or undefined. And then we're going to try to get the item. I think this is actually a function. Yep. And it takes the index number, and we want the 0th one. Now we'll confirm that this file is not null or undefined. And if that's the case, that's when we actually want to handle the file upload. But I'm not just going to call upload video here. I'm actually going to define another wrapper function, which is called handle upload. And that's going to accept the file as well. And that's just going to be a wrapper, which adds some like error handling logic. So I'm going to go like this, handle upload. It's going to look like this. It's going to accept a file, of course, and it's going to try to call upload video, passing in the file. It's just that easy. Now, this is an asynchronous function, so we are going to call await on it, and we're going to take a look at the response like this, and we're going to wrap this guy. Well, we should probably specify that this function is asynchronous. and we're going to wrap it in a try catch like this, where it'll catch any errors and then it will log the errors. Actually, instead of logging it, let's make it even more obvious and actually set an alert in our browser. It's not going to look very nice, but it's going to be really good for debugging purposes, and that's kind of what we're going for right now. Failed to upload file. This was the error. So we'll take this back and actually move it into the try block. And if it's successful, then we'll alert with this, that the file uploaded successfully. And the response looks like this. I don't know if there's actually going to be a response from Google Cloud when we upload a file, but we will log it nonetheless. So now we pretty much have everything done here. We have our upload logic. We even have a little bit of error handling here. It's time to test it out. I'm a little bit nervous because there's so many things that can go wrong, but assuming you set the permissions correctly, it should work. And also as long as you have your awaits as well. So now let's head back into our browser, and I still have my front end running, and we're going to check if we can upload a video. So this is the raw videos bucket. I actually cleaned it up just so we can make things a little bit more like easy to see. And we're going to try uploading a video from the client now. I'm going to upload kind of the same 10-second video I've been doing, and you can see the generate upload URL request was made, and we get the dialog here a few seconds later that the upload itself was successful. So remember, this is just fetching the URL, which allows us to upload, and then shortly after that we actually start uploading, and that will obviously take a few seconds. Depending on how big your file is, it could take minutes, maybe hours. But now let's take a look at the raw videos bucket. Nothing there yet, but let's try refreshing. I don't know why they have a refresh button here if you actually have to refresh the page every time something updates, but okay. And we see the video, 5.6 megabytes. Now let's go into our processed videos bucket out here, and 300 kilobytes. So it definitely is a smaller resolution. I won't show you the video, but end to end things are finally working and we're getting pretty close to our finished product. Now we just have to be able to watch videos in the UI as well.